Recording. So I'm streaming on Twitch at the same time. Okay. Galasan, Adam Long, ACP, Florida Hay, Adi Day, Hadeep Ashan, Zayuji Ha, Muskogee Day, Sinki Wan, Saad Ochine, Tulsa Hay, Saad Ochine Wado. Welcome, everybody. My name is Adam. I was just speaking in the UT language. I'm from St. Pete, Florida, born and raised. But in June, I'll be moving out to Tulsa, Oklahoma to do more work with my tribe. Today, we're going to talk about Natives in Tech. It's an organization I started for a few reasons, which we'll get into, but essentially trying to build applications that empower Native communities. And to get started, I just wanted to highlight that this presentation is made with open source tools. So made with love, of course, that's the first ingredient. And then I use this framework called Spectacle.js. You can find it on GitHub. I'm also using Netlify to deploy this application to the cloud, because I don't know servers. And also, Spectacle under the hood uses Create React App. And if you use Facebook, then you've used React. That is the front-end user interface framework that allows you to build more dynamic and engaging interfaces. And so Create React App gives you like a easy to get started build process to create a React application, like ones that are at Facebook. Okay, story time. So yeah, my name is Adam Recvlohe. Last name has a long story. If you want to know about it, ask me later. Yeah, I was born and raised in St. Pete. I wasn't raised in my culture. My mom is my dad is Muskogee Yuchi. My mom is Canadian. So yeah, I was born in St. Pete. Always identified with being Native, even though I wasn't raised in the culture. I don't really know why. But in college, when I went to University of Florida, that's when I got more into learning about my culture. And so I started going out to Oklahoma, started to learn the language, started to learn the ceremonies, the songs, the dances. And at that point in time, my career was kind of centered around education. So I went to UF to get a degree in political science, which I never used. So no return on investment on that education, unfortunately. And so after college, I started working and doing community work. So I worked for UT Language Project. I worked for Muskogee Food Sovereignty Initiative. I worked for Blimple High School, doing cultural studies. So yeah, mostly in education. And I kind of want to bring this up because everyone kind of has different paths. You don't have to have like this one path where you're always studying computer science and you think you need a degree to get into another field or whatnot. But I was at Hillsborough Community College, which is in Tampa, Florida. I was a instructional designer, basically helping instructors better teach online. I would encourage them not to post 2-hour lectures and instead post shorter 5-minute, 10, 15-minute lectures and have like additional learning material. And while I was there, that's when I got into coding. So that was back in 2014. And from there, started learning to code and transitioned into being a software developer. And now I am a front-end software developer at this company called SimSpace. They're based out of Boston, and they're a cybersecurity company. Basically, we train all different types of organizations. We train banks, we train the military how to deal with cybersecurity attacks by creating a whole environment with servers that are set up, and we have a red team that attacks the people that they're training, and from that experience they know how to defend against attacks against their networks. So yeah, just want to make sure I cover everything. Half Muskogee, half Canadian, so I have 3 citizenships. So if I need to go to Canada, I can. It was looking like that a couple years ago, but I stayed. But yeah, front-end software engineer at SimSpace. Been doing front-end development for the past 4 or 5 years, and I consider myself an open source contributor. I've contributed to all kinds of projects on GitHub. So it might be a change to documents, it might be a change to an API, but it's really cool to be a part of this open source community, and that's kind of what I want to get into this talk, just so that you're kind of familiar and aware of the resources that are out there in order to help you build applications in a more efficient, faster way. I guess gone are the days where you're kind of this developer that sits in their cubicle and you're like, dang, I got to figure this out, and it's just you, and you spend a whole day trying to figure it out, and nowadays it's you just Google Stack Overflow, and some troll answered a question, it proved why someone was wrong, and you got your answer, and you can move along with your day. So that's kind of the nature of open source, which is it's good. It gives you a lot of answers to or solutions to problems that you have. But there's also the other side, the side where you do deal with those developers that can achieve things in solitary confinement. But yeah, we're going to get into talking about open source technology. So what is open source technology? So the very first point is that it gives rights to users. So it's basically the right to take software, run it on any machine, be able to change that software if you want to. You don't have to change it. And then be able to redistribute that software with those changes, or just redistribute the software as is. And so that's the nature of open source. If you purchase proprietary software, which you probably have, Windows, they're going to ask you, okay, run it on just one computer. You can't break the user agreement. You can't install it on another software. All these kinds of constraints that you have on yourself for using that piece of software, which is a little bit different than Linux, for example. So Linux is a more, I guess, down to the metal software that has over now 12,000 contributors. So it's one of the biggest open source projects out there. And it basically allows you to power your operating system. So this Mac computer is based off of Linux or a derivative of that. And although maybe Mac OS is proprietary, I could install Linux on my computer here and be a Linux user. And you kind of find it very common on PCs to see people using Linux, to see people using Ubuntu or Fedora. And we actually, here in the audience today, we have Cody, who works at Red Hat, and Red Hat is one of the biggest contributors to the Linux kernel. So if you have Linux questions, you need to ask him. So GitHub is basically a cloud platform that holds or houses over 100 million repositories. So the sheer number of repositories, there's probably a lot of junk on there, to be honest, but there's still a lot of content on there that you can learn from, that you can use, that you can gain inspiration from, that all you have to do is install it onto your local machine, and you're ready to go. You'll probably have to read through the docs, you'll have to ask some questions, but it's kind of a repository of information as much as it is code. The old adage, I think, in development is you should read more code than you write in order to learn how to write more efficient code or learn how to do certain things with animation or whatever it might be. But GitHub is an excellent source to look for that inspiration and see what other people are doing to help build the application that you're trying to build for your community. Any questions? Okay, another story time. So how did I get into development? So yeah, back in 2014, like I mentioned, I started at Hillsborough Community College, started looking into learning open source, learning through open source tools. My brother, who was actually a developer out in California during that time, I asked him, I was like, what should I do? I kind of want to get into coding. I kind of don't really like where my career prospects are at. I kind of want to do something that's not only financially stable, but also gives me the opportunity to work remote. So I was just looking for this opportunity for myself. And he was like, hey, look at my LinkedIn and just learn those things. I said, okay. So I looked at his LinkedIn, and it had Node, and it had JavaScript, and it had frameworks, and it had Ruby on Rails. So I actually started learning Ruby on Rails because that was kind of a big, what they call model view controller framework at that time. Basically helps you build web applications. Twitter was first built using Ruby on Rails, and then they transitioned into using Node. So yeah, I started learning about Ruby on Rails, but if you ever get started learning Ruby on Rails, you learn that there's a lot of magic involved, a lot of hand waving, and so at that moment in time, I kind of thought, well, I'm not really learning anything right now, or at least I didn't feel like I was learning anything, because there is quite a bit of a difference between Ruby on Rails and the Ruby programming language. There's a lot of special syntax in Ruby on Rails that I wasn't familiar with, and when I tried to translate the two between each other, it was difficult. It was difficult. But there were a lot of tutorials out there. There was a lot of people teaching Ruby on Rails. Like I think I did 1 month Rails, and they said I was going to be a Ruby on Rails developer afterward, but then I didn't. So should have got my money back on that one then. And so I started to get into, so my brother was saying, hey, learn JavaScript and Node. So I got into learning full stack JavaScript. And so there's a resource out there called freecodecamp.org. And through that website, they basically gave me a roadmap in order to learn full stack web development. So full stack meaning on the front end, they teach you JavaScript, and specifically now they're teaching you React. And then on the back end, they teach you Node. So Node is the JavaScript version that runs on servers. And so I started getting into that, and I never really got too much into the back-end development of things. I kind of liked doing front-end development. And so I just started building my portfolio. So I started a GitHub account. I put on my LinkedIn that I was a developer, even though I wasn't at the time. Fake it till you make it kind of thing. I really faked it. Yeah. And so I was just kind of preparing for, making this transition in my career. And then also at the same time, I was doing community work. I was teaching classes, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Scratch, because I kind of needed something to reinforce what I was learning. So in the community in St. Pete, there was a coding boot camp. Previously, it was called the Iron Yard. Now the organization is called Suncoast Developers Guild. Um, and these boot camps are kind of popping up all over the United States. There's one in Nashville that I know of, and others that are around the country. The one that is in my community is actually a nonprofit, and so they go off the nonprofit model. It's not entirely profit based, but there are ones that are profit based, and they're really good too. So it just depends on if you want to pay or not, basically, at the end of the day. I didn't want to pay, so even though they existed and they're in my community, I spent enough on education at that point. I said, no, I'm just gonna, teach myself. So like I said, I used Free Code Camp. I went through all the different tutorials on the front end. I built my portfolio. I used a resource also called CodePen.io. I don't know if you've heard of it, but CodePen is really good because it basically creates a development environment for you in the browser and allows you to quickly write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript without having to do that locally. If you had to do it on your own, you could. You'd have HTML, CSS, you'd have like a build pipeline, you'd have, browser refreshing and all of that, but don't worry about it. Just use CodePen and just not worry about all that stuff. And so what's also nice about CodePen is it's also a community as well. So you'll have people on CodePen like showing 3D animations and graphics and like really cool tutorials on things. So I used CodePen basically as my tool to display what I knew. And at that point, all they really want you to know is HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. So I was kind of okay. And so after 8 months of working full time in the day and then spending 4 hours in the evening and building my portfolio, I was able to get a job at a local company called Valpak. I don't know if you've heard of them. They send out coupons. They spam your mailbox. And so they actually needed a Node developer, but all I knew was JavaScript, but they thought, Node, JavaScript is pretty much the same. So yeah, they hired me there. And I was, it was good. I kind of got my first break into the industry, which is kind of what you need. It may not be the best job in the world, but you got your foot in the door, and then you can kind of start, growing from there. It's really different, obviously, learning on your own, and then actually being in a development environment and working on software that's sent out into the world and people actually use it. So it's good to have that experience too. So yeah, so this is a picture of kind of what I look like during the day, doing software development, usually at a cafe nowadays. So like I mentioned, I do work remote. The past 2 positions I worked remotely. So the previous job I was at, the company was Citrus Bite, and they are basically an agency. They work with big companies like Apple, and they help build products for them. It's kind of like another wing for those types of companies. Like for example, if they want to innovate on a product and they need like an additional team to help them with that, then we would come in and we would help build that product for them. The main product that I worked on there was a calendar application. So our client, computer's getting loud. The client was ITV, and ITV is a TV channel. And so they needed a calendar that worked across all of their teams. And they had some certain requirements, like, you had to be able to download a link, you had to be able to print out a physical copy. So kind of like using modern technology to support like maybe some older practices. But either way, we used React to build that. And we used a open source library called Recvlohe. At that point, I had never built a calendar, but let's just say if I did, it'd probably be pretty buggy, probably be missing some features. And what was really nice about this, working on this project was, okay, I need a calendar. Okay, I'm gonna check GitHub real quick and see what they got, and found Recvlohe calendar, and it had essentially the bare bones, starting point of what we needed in the project. So instead of spending 3 or 4 months or longer trying to just build out the functionality of what a basic calendar should do, we were able to hit the ground running and start to use that calendar in production right away and give them the features that they wanted. So drag and drop was something else that they wanted in the calendar, being able to freely drag one event to another event or modify it in some way. So yeah, it's so I was just hacking like this away on that and trying to get it out there. Let's see. Oh, it didn't render. Okay. Well, that was supposed to be a puzzle piece, but I guess it doesn't accept UTF-8 or something. I don't know. Anyways, and that's supposed to be a toolbox after what I use. Come on. Let's see. Come on. So yeah, on a daily basis, I used React. I also use this language called ReasonML. So React was started at Facebook. It was started by this engineer that actually first worked at Instagram, and he created a prototype for React, and then using an ML language, so standard ML. And then once he created the prototype in standard ML, he converted it to JavaScript, and it became the React framework. Another language that they have at Facebook, I'm using all Facebook stuff, I know. It's open source, so I don't feel so bad, but they have another language called ReasonML, and that's what's called a functional programming language. If you've ever heard of Haskell, that is what is considered like a pure functional programming language. ReasonML is not all the way like Haskell. It has some impure functionalities, but it kind of allows you to work with more abstract data types that are more pleasant to work with. If you've who's worked with JavaScript before? Anybody? Oh, okay. So undefined, method, whatever of undefined does not exist. No, it needs to exist. Tell me, what is this existence thing? But so instead of working with undefined, or undefined errors, or null is another error you get in JavaScript, those don't exist in ReasonML. Instead, you work with what's called options, and you either have an option that has a sum of a value, or it has none. So working in a language like ReasonML, I don't have to deal with those things, those like trivial things of something not existing. I can just handle the data the way it needs to be handled. So I really enjoy ReasonML, and they have bindings to React. So I use ReasonML with Reason React. And if you go to nativesintech.org, wink, wink, that site was made with Reason and Reason React. There was a developer, again, who made an open source tool, and he created a static site generator using Reason and Reason React. So that is the technology that's used to create the nativesintech.org website. And also Netlify. Netlify is basically just allows you to deploy sites like super easy. You don't need to you don't even need to load the files onto like any server or whatever, or GoDaddy or whatever it is. You can just type in the GitHub repo that you're using, and just tell it how to build it, and tell where to get the build files, and then that's it, and then it just deploys it. So really super easy to use, and I recommend using it if you're trying to deploy your own website, and you're kind of into development and stuff. So Okay, so what is natives in tech? Um, so natives in tech is really just an idea, although it is an organization, and chances are I might transform it into a 501 or whatever. But it's really just an idea of bringing together native and non-native developers and to build native-centric applications. Um, and so there's already quite a few non-native developers are already building native-centric applications, and we'll talk about some of those projects. Um, but I guess the way in which natives in tech, or the way I've tried to make it successful, is to also connect with developers where they like to congregate, and they like to congregate on Twitter. So we do have a Twitter at Natives in Tech, um, and so yeah, I mean, they use it for talking about what new technology they like, things that they're interested in. If they've written a new blog post, they'll post on Twitter. Um, and we also have a Slack. So if you like being distracted during your workday, Slack is good for that. Um, Slack is used a lot in the development field. I guess a lot of people here use Slack. Not really? Oh, okay. So I can kind of show you what Slack looks like. I'm already using it. But here's like the platform. We have a Natives in Tech Slack. And if you go to nativesintech.org, you'll get all these links. Oh, it's not displaying. I will show that after the talk. But yeah, it's basically a chat form, and it's sometimes mindless dribble that's on there, but it's a way to again connect with the community using platforms and tools that they're accustomed to using. So Slack is another one of those. What else? So yeah, that's what Natives in Tech is. Any questions?
Can you explain what you mean about native-centric applications?
Oh yeah, so I'm talking about mobile. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm talking about applications that are built to reinforce native culture, knowledge, and identity. And we'll get into those applications and some examples of it. But essentially, the native communities, all of our communities have specific needs or specific cases that may not pertain to other communities. I went to a conference last week for the Native American, convening on Native American students in computer science. And one of the big topics that they were talking about was connectivity, and how in some tribes they have intermittent connectivity, or maybe sometimes not much at all. And so that requires like a different mindset in terms of building the applications for those communities. So one of the ideas that I brought up during that meeting was to start thinking about building offline first web applications, or what's also called progressive web applications. So there's a whole set of knowledge, there's a whole knowledge base now around this idea of offline first and how to do it in a successful way. And so you use like very sophisticated, or maybe not so sophisticated, but you use methods of caching in order to serve up a web page, even when they're not connected, and to even allow them to interact with that application even when they're not online. And then once they get back online, they can get the data that they need and all the updates and whatnot. But it's not required that they have to have that in order to use the application. So because we all have these different requirements for our products, we need to start thinking about those tools that we need to then build those applications. And it usually points to using open source technology to do that. And to really look to open source to help us build those applications, and be thinking about how to better serve our communities. I'm going to rag on ACES a little quickly. Don't get mad. But ACES website, if you run it on 2G, it takes about like a minute to load. And one of the main reasons for that is because they use uncompressed images. So they use the same exact image that's 1,000, like that's 2 megabytes or more, um, to render and that's because it has a lot of additional data that's not really needed. But they could easily, cut down on that time for loading if they just compress their images. And there's a website out there called Squish. But anyway, it compresses your images and makes it send less bandwidth over the network. So people that are in not good connections, 2G, 3G, don't have to wait like a minute or so to see the app load. And so again, it's I guess we're talking about building native-centric applications, but I think we're also talking about how do we better build applications that serve our communities and all of the different communities throughout the United States and throughout the world. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. So hopefully your mind is blown at this point. Even if it's not, this is like, this is a meme that's used like in every developer talk, so I just had to include it for this one as well. It's fun to look at. So what are some of the applications that are being created at this point? So these are all links. So let me see if I can. So yeah, currently there's a project going on where we have a group of Hawaiian students that want to transform C#, and instead of it being written in English and using a English Western worldview, they want to instead write C# programs in Hawaiian. And so they're going through the process. They have this is kind of the group that's working on this. And the only reason I know about this is because someone posted it on Slack in our Native and Tech channel. And I thought this was really, really cool. I believe the Cherokees of Oklahoma are kind of doing something similar. But yeah, essentially they are working on transforming the language, writing in Hawaiian, using Hawaiian concepts and ideas, and so that they can build games. They can, when they are working in their offices, they don't have to translate or go in between English and Hawaiian. They can just talk about everything holistically in Hawaiian. So I think this is a really cool project. I'm working on a conference that's going to take place November 9th. I'm trying to get one of these students or someone in this network to speak. So if you have connections, it's kind of been hard to get a hold of them, but yeah, help me out. What's next? So I guess a few of you have learned about native-land.ca. So this is the site, and let me get a little closer. So basically, the purpose of this application is to show the different territories of tribes in the United States. So the guy that is working on this, his name is Victor Temprano. He's based out of Vancouver. This has been kind of like an ongoing project that he's worked on over the past few years. He's gotten some volunteers as well to help. And so he has some requirements for mapping these territories. He wants to make sure that there's at least like one resource that references the points. And so I kind of helped out a little. I actually didn't do the right thing. He just wanted traditional territories, not like contemporary territories. So I made a small, error in that, but he was okay with it. But essentially, what he did was he created a WordPress plugin where you go into WordPress, you put in the coordinates using Mapbox. I don't know if you've heard of Mapbox, but it's again an open source tool that allows you to create really cool interactive maps without having to build it from scratch. And so you put the coordinates in, you save it, and then in a few minutes you'll see it show up here. So you're given a few different ways to create these coordinates. You can use it creating points, you can use it creating like a shape tool, but as long as you have that source, you kind of have a general idea. It doesn't have to be perfect, but again, you just put in the data and then it renders it. You don't have to put in the actual coordinates, but you're actually just looking at a map and putting in the coordinates that way. So you don't need like, I don't know what, like 50 million coordinates to make that line. And if we zoom out, there's been one guy that's just been like on a tear. He's been putting like a bunch of new like information and sources in. So he's put in like, if you look at, we got, I think Australia has their traditional territories. We have people putting in information for South America. So there's a lot of work going on. It's basically all volunteer based. But if you want to kind of contribute and help with their project, maybe give them better sources, maybe update the coordinates a little bit, you can. He doesn't currently. I kind of talked with him about helping on more of the development side. There's really maybe not that much work to do, but there's a lot of effort being undertaken to map all of these traditional territories. So we have another person that is in our chat, our Names and Text chat, Slack chat, and his name is Manuel Manger. Yeah, Manuel Manger. Okay. And so what he did was he created using machine learning. He was able to create a translator between Spanish and this indigenous language from Mexico, which I'm not going to pronounce. And so it kind of opens up like I think a whole new world in terms of what and how can we use technology to benefit our native communities. And so even myself, like I thought, okay, what if we had like a Muskogee Creek language bot, and if I said something to it, it would know how to respond, or it would know how to interact with me in some way using the language. So I think this is a very interesting project. I don't really know how to speak Spanish too well, but if I put that in and then I translate it, it shows the indigenous term. And so with machine learning, it's not strictly trying to do a one-to-one translation. That's kind of like the more primitive way that translators worked in the past. Nowadays, if you use like Google Translate, basically it takes a lot of information from resources and compiles it down and makes some kind of probability of what they're trying to say, and then try to convert that into a more coherent translation in the other language that it's being translated into. I'm not a machine learning expert, so I can't answer all the questions, but that's my general understanding of how machine learning works. And machine learning and AI kind of go hand in hand. Um, and so he's going to speak at our conference and talk about some of his work and other areas in which people can get involved. So there is this lady here is Nicole Archibald. I want to, if I'm saying that correct, but she is Wampanoag, and she teaches web development courses. So here you have someone that's native. You have someone that is has gone through learning web development, understands the struggles of learning web development, and basically has started, this business called La Vie in Code, and is, teaching other people how to get into development, to learn it, and to, get a job afterwards. So it's kind of cool to see other Native people out there that are in this field that are giving back, that are helping to create more developers. There is a shortage out there. I mean that's kind of the reason why I think it was easy for me to find work within 8 months, or you can say under a year, because there's more jobs than there are people to fill them. And so if you take an interest, it doesn't make it any easier. Um, but if you take an interest, if you get into computer science, if you get into, I mean, not only web development, but any kind of development. If you're doing Python, or if you're doing C++ or C, like more lower level languages, then you have you have the opportunity to really get into that field quickly, and to also progress in that field as well. Um, I was talking to a student the other day during the mentoring session, and he was like, "Well, how do you progress?" And I was like, "Yeah, you just go from one job to the next, basically." That's the new generation, I guess. That's the millennial in me, I guess. And so you can really grow quite rapidly. I mean, you still have to learn. You still have to put in the work. But like I was saying, there's more jobs than there are people to fill. People are looking for developers. You still want to find the right workplace, but if you're not satisfied with where you're at, you can always start to look and see what else is out there. And so yeah, you can. It's not seen as anything bad to like go from one job to the next within even less than a year's time. Um, and so yeah, you have a lot of potential in this field. Let's see. So this is Terra Stories. So this is the project that is being undertaken by this group of developers under the organization, I guess, that is Ruby for Good. Um, so we have a person in Slack. His name's Rudo Kemper. I think he's non-native Hispanic, and so he's working on this project to build offline. It's offline first, so it works without connectivity. Uh, uh, Basically, a map application. It's slightly different because in this case, it's about keeping the history of the different locations in the area. So there's going to be different stories tied to different places in the Amazon, and so not just the Amazon, but also in other territories in the world. And so they're building and helping to build offline first application to kind of be a repository for these stories. So this is what this application is. And yeah, you can also find it on GitHub if you want. And good old mascots. This is not actually, I don't think this is actually open source, but I kind of just want to throw this in there anyway. Um, so what this person did is kind of, it's not entirely like complex. He's actually using Google Maps, and he's just adding little pinpoints to where schools are still using native mascots. So he's kind of building a database so people can see like where native mascots are in the United States. And so I just thought this was really cool just to show it because again, it's another use of technology. It's another use of open source technology, which is Google Maps. You can use Google Maps and the Google API to create something like this if you want. And so I just wanted to show that. Oh man, almost time. Let's. Okay, so why open source? So my take on this is basically that we as native people, we've always taken things from the outside world and kind of made it our own. So whether that's fried bread or whether that's beading or and to include also that, you know, we do share. We share our stories. We share sometimes different medicines with people's. We are open to sharing knowledge with other people. In some cases, maybe not so much, but you know, we do have a culture of sharing. People learning, you know, peyote songs and the peyote tradition, or you know, powwow songs and dances, or stomp dance, or whatever it is. And so I think this is something that's already kind of natural to you know, who we are as a people. And so, you know, open source technology is just another natural representation of that. These are people from all over the world sharing their knowledge, sharing, willing to, you know, create something and let others use it for free, for no gain, for no monetary gain at least. And so, yeah, I think open source is definitely something that we're accustomed to, and now I think we can use it to make it our own. We can take these open source technologies that are out there and build things that better serve our communities, or build things that better represent who we are as a people. Okay, so let's stay connected. Like I said, nativesintech.org is the website. That was a bluebird when I put it on there before, but now it's a red bird. But we're on Twitter and also GitHub. If you're familiar with GitHub, their mascot is the Octocat. So it's a cat that looks like an octopus, like has tentacles and everything. But anyways, there is a reason for that. So yeah, if you want to reach out, email is hello@nativesintech.org. There's like several other like side initiatives that I work on at the same time. For example, we have a blog on Natives in Tech, and I'm going to, one of the things that I like doing is highlighting Native people that work in the tech field. So I'm going to do a blog post on this young lady over here in the near future. Cody is next in the queue, so there'll be an article about him. We have a mailing list, so once something is new, like a new article or whatnot is out there, you can be emailed the link to it. If you join the GitHub organization, then you can be included to the Awesome Natives in Tech page. So let me show that really quickly. Let me see. Awesome. So yeah, this is just, I'm just hitting the GitHub API So essentially, if you're just part of the GitHub organization that we have, you then can create projects under the Natives in Tech namespace on GitHub, and then you'll be on this list, and people still won't know who you are because you don't put anything on GitHub, or at least you don't put your name up there. So it's kind of a hit and miss on that front. But I think once people get more aware of using GitHub and being more aware of people using it, they'll add more information. But what else is going on? Yeah, I mentioned the conference. It's going to be November 9th. It's going to be live streamed. It's going to be free. And so if you want to attend, that would be great. We need more speakers. We currently just have 3. One of the speakers is Victor Temprano, the person that's working on native-land.ca. He's going to talk about specifically how he's working with Native communities. He's setting up a board of directors, which are going to all be Indigenous peoples. So I think that's really cool. So he'll get to speak on that. Manuel's going to talk about that dictionary, ML dictionary that he created. And we also have Alex. He's going to be speaking on using open source technology to help with language work in his tribe. So yeah, we're looking for more speakers. I'd like to have 8 speakers for that day. And so yeah, it's a work in progress. But anyway, yeah, just any questions? I got 4 minutes. I guess I read all your minds. Okay, well, thank you for attending, and just talk to me after if you have any questions. Thank you. All right.